Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a video and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from hundreds of successful people from around the world. Today, it is my privilege to welcome not just a dear friend, a fellow IPO member, but a highly successful and recognized professional from the corporate world turned entrepreneur, Mr. Tejpreet Chopra. TP, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ashutosh.
TP is the founder and CEO of Bharat Light and Power Group. He was earlier the president and CEO of GE India, Sri Lanka, and Bangladesh. He was recognized by the World Economic Forum as a young global leader. And as I mentioned, he's a fellow IPO member from the Delhi chapter. And he's also the co-chair of the World Economic Forum's Global Future Council. TP, tell me, what would you say are three key milestones in your life or your career?
Ashutosh, first of all, thank you very much for having me on your show, and it's a real honor and a privilege to be out here. I think that's a good question, and I'll sort of say there were actually four, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure.
And I think each one played a little role in the long term, in terms of what I achieved.
Mm-hmm.
The first one was I was a sportsman, and I was a swimmer. I had the opportunity to go for the Junior Asians, and then finally I had to stop to make a decision whether I pursue a career of a normal student life or just become a professional sportsman. But swam at the national levels quite a lot, and used to train anything between 5 hours to 7 hours a day for nearly 16 years of my life. But I think what that actually does was gives you or anybody in the world a sense of achievement at a very young age to one, not only build, help you physically, but also give you a sense of purpose and achievement at a very young age. So that's number one. The second one big step was when they made me the CEO of GE in India and Southeast Asia, not for the purpose of that it was a fabulous job, etc., but for me, it was one of the best learning opportunities in my life.
Correct.
The ability to work for one of the largest 10 corporates in the world, to be able to learn about a variety of industries from energy, oil and gas, water, aviation, rail, healthcare, transportation. I think there are very few corporations that you have that ability to learn. So I think that was one element that was really a useful step in my life for the opportunity to learn and for the opportunity to learn about leadership and leading people. The third big step was when I became an entrepreneur. And Ashutosh, you're an entrepreneur as well. You've been through that journey. It's a rock and roll journey. It's never an easy path.
Correct.
But I would have always regretted in my life if I hadn't made that decision. I could have carried on the corporate life, and one thing leads to another. You get another bigger job, and life moves on. But that ability to completely get away from what we did for a living, to start life all over again, is really been an incredible learning experience for me.
Correct.
And just the fourth one was just becoming a YGL at the World Economic Forum, for the only reason that what it does in these kinds of opportunities that you're privileged to get is really the ability to learn from an incredible group of people who've done such incredibly successful and different things, all the way from a guy going to research how do you protect the sea life around the world, or if there's Ian Thorpe who goes and wins a gold medal at the Olympics, to interact with some of the best musicians in the world. So it's an incredible eclectic group of folks that one has the ability to learn from and gain from their experiences.
Fantastic. So, TV, let's talk a little bit now about your company, Bharat Light and Power. Tell me about the venture and the three businesses that you are in.
Yeah. So, Ashutosh, I'll just share with you a small little story to just tell you why I even became an entrepreneur. So, I remember traveling in the US one day, and I remember a message on my BlackBerry. Those days there were BlackBerries, which said that, "Dear TP, this is a message from an old man. I'm coming to India. If you can spare a few moments for a cup of coffee, I'd be grateful." So I looked at the bottom, and it said, "Regards, Jack."
Wow.
So I was wondering who the hell Jack is. So I scrolled up top of the BlackBerry message, and I found it was actually from Jack Welch. So I was super excited. So I wrote back to Jack saying, "Jack, it'll be a privilege to catch up with you when you come to Delhi." Unfortunately, he wasn't able to meet me because he got busy with other things. But what he did let me know was, he said, "When you come to Boston, come and meet me." A couple of months later, I went back to Boston, and I went and had lunch with Jack. And I spent about a couple of hours with him. And it was a fascinating lunch because I asked him 1,000 questions and he did the same. And I learned a lot. And at the end of the lunch, he says to me, what do you want to do in life? So I told him the good corporate answer, Ashutosh. I said, I'm a GE guy, 15 years. I'll carry on at GE and I want to continue growing. And he says, what do you really want to do in life?
Okay.
So then I thought to myself, I said, should I tell him the truth or not? So that's when I told him, I said, Jack, one day I want to become an entrepreneur because I truly want to give back to India. Because at that point in time, 7-8 years ago, Ashutosh, nearly about 300 million people didn't have access to energy.
Correct.
The whole clean energy revolution was just about starting. This whole discussion about sustainability was, beginning to pick up speed, and I wanted to do something about it. So I said that to Jack, and then Jack points to me like this. He says, what are you scared about? So I hummed and hawed a little bit, and he says, I'll tell you what your problem is. You're scared to lose your job. And he starts shouting at me, right? So then I came away from that lunch, and obviously in front of him, I acted like a real tough guy. And I said, I'm not scared, Jack, I know what it's like, etc. But the honest truth, I was scared. I was really scared.
Correct.
Because you're leading this fantastic corporate life. You're getting to meet such incredible people, and you don't want to give it up. But then I also thought to myself that if I don't do it now, I never will. I had just about turned 40 at that time, and I decided that this is the time I have to do it. So I pulled the plug and I started life all over again as an entrepreneur.
Amazing.
And there were two areas that I was passionate about. One was clean energy, because I really figured that that was where the future was going. And the second one was technology.
Okay.
So broadly, the three companies, one focuses on large utility scale wind. The second one is on solar. And the one that I get the most excited actually about today is about AI, the impact of AI and IoT technologies in the industrial world.
Okay.
So it's a completely independent technology group called Industry.ai that's really focusing on how do we drive productivity and reliability in manufacturing and industry using AI and IoT technologies going forward.
So, let's now focus on your passion, which is Industry.ai, and what it is doing across, because you mentioned that this across industries and not just in power. Tell me about what you're doing in that area.
So, Ashutosh, I'll rewind the clock a little bit to share with you why I even got into all this. I'm a manufacturing and a GE capital guy.
Correct.
I don't know that much about technology, at least 6-7 years ago. And 7-8 years ago when we started the company, the BLP group, and I was passionate about doing something in terms of clean energy. What I would tell people when I was still with GE was, turbines don't fail, they run for 25, 30 years. But the sad truth is machines do fail. And usually it's the failure of the smallest component that shuts down a $3 or $4 million turbine. So that would happen, which is a normal course of life. But one day, about 6 years ago, one of my turbines burned down to ashes.
Okay.
So it's not a pleasant sight seeing a 120-meter turbine with a 20-ton nacelle on fire.
Wow.
So that's when I thought I needed to do something differently. And the existing model where the OEMs do the operations and maintenance on your turbines didn't make sense, because if it was working all right, a turbine should never have burnt down.
Correct.
So that's when we started this journey of creating this platform where we started monitoring hundreds of tags of data every second from our wind farms and solar farms. We collected the data, wrote a bunch of algorithms, and as a result of that, we could predict failures in a gearbox, generator, bearing, a blade, hundreds of hours before the turbine shut down. And as a result of that, we improved machine availability from the high 80s to low 90s to the high 90s.
Wow.
And as a result of that, saw a huge improvement in productivity. So that's how this journey started. And Ashutosh, as you know, as an entrepreneur, nothing is really planned that well.
Correct.
Because you really don't have control of your own destiny
Yes.
as much as you think you have. And one thing led to another, and a few other companies came to us and said, listen, we like what you see, what you're doing in wind and solar. Why don't you do it in our factory as well? So I went to one of the largest FMCG companies in India, and they said, help us out, improve productivity. And I said, okay, fine. Why don't you give us your data? He said, which data? I said, sir, you know how to make the things, not me. So you should know which data I should get, and then our data scientists can review. So that's when I realized, Ashutosh, that the other problem in this whole space is that large manufacturing companies have machines that they have invested in over the last 10 years, 15 years, 20 years,
Correct.
which don't necessarily have the technology that exists today, and they don't communicate. So we ended up creating a dedicated IoT team that actually installs these sensors and gateways to make them communicate, to be able to extract the data, run the analytics, and then predict failures in machines.
Amazing.
But the exciting part, Ashutosh, is it spans across industries.
I can
And
imagine.
there is just no industry in the world that is not going to get impacted with this. You know, I've seen studies from Forrester and Gartner that keep saying that in the next couple of years, companies that actually have AI or adopt these technologies will extract $1.2 trillion of value versus companies that don't adopt it.
Wow.
So I think this is going to really change, whether it is in auto industry, oil and gas, chemicals, you know, FMCG. This is going to really transform the way industry is done going forward, especially given the fact that finding the right kinds of talent and the right kinds of people is going to get more difficult.
So tell me, you know, this AI, Industry.ai that you're doing and working on IoT, at what stage of its life cycle is it in India? I mean, it's at early stage. What will it take for a very large number of organizations to adopt this technology? Because if you're talking such incredible productivity gains, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah. Ashutosh, I think we are literally on that crux that it's going to change, and I'll tell you why. Sometimes things happen in life that are out of your control that makes a trigger happen.
Correct.
And I think the trigger is COVID, right? I think COVID is going to do to manufacturing what, if you remember in our times when we were younger, we used to have the tape that we used to play music with.
Correct.
When the tape went to CDs, in that transformation from analog to digital,
Correct.
I think that's exactly what's going to happen in the world of manufacturing as well, for a couple of reasons. COVID has shown an over-reliance on supply chains especially from China. And therefore, now that COVID has resulted in breaking of supply chains, large corporates, I feel, are going to start exploring other countries to get into the supply chain process, to have an N+1 supply chain strategy. Two, the speed at which innovation is happening, because in COVID we had a situation where we couldn't find people in the factory because of COVID and all that. So we had to change the way we think. And I see a lot of CEOs now thinking about how do we replace people with productivity through technology.
Right.
And I think that's the other transformation that's happening. So I feel that COVID is going to accelerate this. Obviously, adoption is going to start with the larger companies, because that's where the bigger impact is. But I think the price at which the democratization of technology is happening and the speed at which it's happening, it's going to get adopted by larger MSMEs as well very, very quickly. And I'll just end by saying there are 5 factors that's going to drive this adoption far faster than even I could have thought. One, the cloud, right? The cloud is the same for everybody, same for you, for me, for all of us. Two, mobility. I can get data from thousands of wind turbines in every corner of the world for virtually free. So it's that ability to move data around is virtually very, very low. Sensor prices have come down by nearly 50 to 60 to 70%, depending on the sensor, in the last 7-8 years, which is making this, connected, this Internet of Things or a connected world become more easily adoptable. The fourth one is high performance compute. High performance compute once upon a time was only with the IBMs and the large corporations of the world. Today, the speed at which the cloud is developing, all of us have access to the same high performance compute as anybody else. And the fifth advantage we have is the availability of engineering and human talent in India, which is, there is still abundance of people. And I think that's going to give us the edge. So for my belief is for these 5 reasons, Ashutosh, that I think the speed at which even smaller corporations or MSMEs will adopt these technologies will be much faster.
And what is the advantage of price? I mean, is it very, very heavily loaded in terms of initial costs? Because there will be a payback.
Ashutosh, as you know, in COVID, the whole world is looking at payback and frugality, and everybody is in a tough situation. So completely understand that. But I go back to those same 5 reasons. The advantage of things like the cloud, it makes it very scalable at a very low cost. And therefore, what used to be a very high capex heavy cost, that's what we've been trying to do at Industry.ai and a lot of companies, that we are transitioning from a capex heavy model to a SaaS model, where a lot of these cutting edge technologies, it's going to become more and more plug and play. If the company has the ability to connect his car, to connect a turbine, to connect a machine, and figure out reliability for us to connect it and extract the data, we can see a huge amount of results. Let me give you a quick example, Ashutosh. Pre-COVID, what we were able to do was to connect cameras anywhere in the world and send out an alert when somebody was not wearing a helmet or a safety jacket. What was interesting back in April was a few companies came to us and said, TP, is there a way that you can detect social distancing breaches? So we thought about that. We didn't think we could do it. But using neural network models from cameras that are 5 years, 8 years old, we don't need any new capex. We are able to connect these cameras, and using these computer vision models, we can detect when social distancing is breached and send out alerts. Now, the fun of what COVID taught us was this. Under normal circumstances, you would need people to go to the factory and do all this connectivity. We've been able to connect hundreds and thousands of cameras all over the world sitting at home. So as long as we have somebody on the other end who can give us some basic connectivity information, today remotely we can connect these cameras around the world and send out alerts if somebody's not wearing a safety jacket. From a security perspective, if there's an intrusion in an airport, if somebody's tagging, if there's a crowd collecting, in a manufacturing setup, if there's a quality and a defect. So the world is just changing so rapidly, Ashutosh, that I think this SaaS model is going to change the game.
Fantastic. So, TP, let me ask you now a few questions about the way you run your businesses. Let me start by asking you that what are the values that you stand for in your three businesses?
Yeah, I think there are about four that come to my mind, right? The first one is the fundamentals of any business. It's all about the people, right? And sometimes we forget about that. It's not about my machines. It's not about anything. It's about the people. Because if you can get the right kind of people together, magic happens, right? So therefore, the first principle is teamwork and leadership and the ability to extract the right team. So that's absolutely critical. I think the second one is culture. Because I think culture is the bond that keeps all the people together. And I think, Ashutosh, in your journey of an entrepreneur, you must have seen the same thing. And I really go back to, you need to create a culture of where people are happy to come and work, not because they are doing it because they have to. Because once you're able to get that shift, where it's a joy to work, where you feel that happiness, that involvement, you get, magic happens.
Correct.
I think the third one is integrity and reputation. I think that's what life's all about, is, we live and die by the sword. And therefore, our ability to do things the right way, we will fail. Not everything works out the way it should. But as long as you keep the integrity and the reputation part, you have the ability to stand up and fight another day.
Correct.
And I think finally, the fourth thing is only because, and I wouldn't really say it's a value, but I also think it's a critical element because that's where the world is going, is around the understanding of innovation and disruption. And it's not really a value, but the reason I say it is that I think going forward, it's going to be critical for the workforce to think constantly about this whole theme of innovation and disruption, because that's going to have a big impact going forward.
Fantastic. So one more question before I move to a few questions for you personally. TP, you've led such amazing companies, large organizations, building a big business. What would you say is your leadership style?
Yeah. Ashutosh, I think two things or three things from my perspective. I think, having been in a large corporation and now being in a much smaller company as an entrepreneur, I think there's no right one model, but I'll say from my perspective, I think the way I do it is I call it democracy with autocracy. Because, and I'll share why I say that, is that as a leader, one needs to be open to get the best perspectives from your team. Because I think the day as a leader, if you surround yourself with yes men, you're dead, right? So I think the leader's responsibility to create an environment or a culture where everybody around you has the ability to speak up and question and say, no, TP, you're wrong. That's the culture you need. However, at the end of the day, somebody has to make a decision.
Correct.
And the buck stops with you.
Correct.
Or the buck stops with somebody. And your head, and you've got to live and die by that decision.
Correct.
So therefore, I call it democracy with autocracy, because at the end of listening to everybody, you've got to make a decision, because no decision is also bad in terms of making things happen. So that's number one. I think the second thing I just say is you've got to lead with example.
Correct.
There's no other way out, right? Whether it is something as small as, if you want your team to be working 8 hours a day or 10 hours a day or 12 hours a day, if you're not able to show that to them, they're going to question why should we do it. And I think that's just the way it is.
Well said.
And the third thing is passion, right? I tell everybody that if you don't have passion, I can teach people how to do physics, I can teach people AI, you can teach people things, but it's very difficult to teach people passion and attitude.
Correct.
And therefore, if you're not passionate, if you don't working with your heart and your mind, and you're not really committed to doing it, and maybe it came from my swimming days, because when you're in a race, you've got to be swimming, and you're swimming your lungs out.
Correct.
You're swimming your heart out to win. So unless you have that passion to really win or do something exciting and celebrate that achievement, it's not going to really work out. So people around you need to feel that passion to want to work with you.
Fantastic. So I think I've got time for 2 or 3 more questions for you. TP, so much success. What does success mean to TP?
I think the first one is the most critical one. I think I get asked a lot, Ashutosh, is why did you become an entrepreneur? Why do you do it? And I really tell people that, believe me, it's not about the money, right? Because the pain you go through as an entrepreneur doesn't even count for what you would actually earn. So I think it has to be a far bigger purpose on why you set out on this journey.
Yeah.
And I think my purpose at that time was, I was passionate about clean energy, and I wanted to make a difference. If I could help in my little way to help some number of people in India get electricity at an affordable price and get clean energy, I was happy that I was being able to contribute to that journey.
Sure.
So I think one is to really make a difference in society. I think the second one is, at the end of the day, we all should leave some sort of a legacy that hopefully people remember that you left some good in your journey on this earth. So I think that would be the second one.
Okay.
And I think the third one for me would be is, I get a lot of happiness if I can help the next generation succeed. If I can create a group of young people who tomorrow will be tomorrow's leaders, who I can help for them to go on to succeed in their lives, I think it gives me a lot of joy and happiness. So I'd say those are 3 things, in my view, that I feel is success.
Fantastic. And I come to my last question now. TP, thousands of people will listen to you and me speak, and they will know of you, etc. My question to you is that, as someone who at a very young age led such a large company, what would your advice be to a young manager who's starting off on their journey?
From my personal journey, I'll give you a few thoughts. The first one is, take the job that nobody else wants, right? And I share that with my own personal experience. I spent a lot of time in my early days in a business in GE called GE Capital Aviation Services, and GCAS was really one of the most successful businesses at GE, and it was a phenomenal business in the aviation world. And the world of aviation is a little club, right? Once you get in, nobody ever leaves. Yeah. And I remember one day the then vice chairman of GE saying, "TP, I want you to go run GE Capital in India." And I said, I'm really not interested. I love aviation. I'm doing really well, etc. Right? And he said, "Why don't you go think about it?" So I said, "Okay, fine." And I went away, right? And that quickly I called up a few friends, and they said, "TP, don't even think about it, right? It's a crappy business. It's in a tough situation. It's not doing well. So don't go there, right?" About 45 minutes later, the vice chairman of GE called me back and he said, "Have you decided?" So I said, "Dave, it's only been 45 minutes. Give me a chance, right?" But then I very quickly thought, I only have three decisions to make, or 3 choices. The first one is I take the job, right? The second one is I don't take the job, and then I'm happy where I am the rest of my life. Or the third one is I might as well just quit and leave. Because if the vice chairman of GE asks you, do you want to do something, and he's opening the door for you to do something bigger, then, and I don't want to do it, then I might as well just go do something else. So at that point in time, I decided, okay, let me take it. And Ashutosh, for the first 1 year, I thought it was the stupidest, dumbest thing I ever did.
Okay.
But nevertheless, to cut the long story short, things turned around,
Yeah.
things got better, and that's what opened the door to my next job, which was to go run GE in India. So I tell everybody, you've got to take the job that nobody wants, because that's when the company tests whether you really have what it takes to jump into the deep end and solve a problem. The second one is develop a core competency, right? You can't just be a generalist in everything. You have to be good at one thing. Then you can learn a lot of other things.
Correct.
But be good at something. So whenever somebody thinks of you, they know that's your real strength.
True.
So be good at something. The third thing I'd say, Ashutosh, is that, and maybe it's just a sign of the times, and maybe we guys come from a different age, and maybe I'm completely wrong.
I'm much older than you are, but that's okay.
I don't know about that, but I just think that now there seems to be a culture where everybody changes jobs every year or every 2 years. And that seems to be the norm. But I just feel bad because I just don't think you develop enough depth to every time you change a job every 1 year or every 2 years. So I just wish that people would just spend a little longer just to get that depth in that one area before you actually move on. And at the end of the day, I would just say and I'm not saying even when I graduated from grad school, I don't claim that I knew the answer to this question, but the sooner you know what your true goal in life is, or what really keeps you happy at night, or what's really, motivates you, then it's fantastic, because that will drive your entire career. If your job is that one day I want to be an entrepreneur, I will tell you exactly that path to take to get to that entrepreneur. However, if your role and your goal in life is to be the CEO of the largest corporation in India, then that's a very, very separate line to take. But if you don't know what that end goal you want to achieve is, then you're waffling along the way and you're just taking things as it comes along. I remember, Jack Welch used to say a saying which was quite good, which is to say, control your own destiny or somebody else will. And I think it's so true, because, if you know where your goal is, then everything you do along the way is towards that goal, which is going to help you significantly.
Fantastic. What a fantastic answer. TP, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure speaking to you. I wish Industry.ai, I wish Bharat Light and Power and you lots and lots of success.
Thank you, Ashutosh. And if there's anything else you want to ask or anything else you want to know, please feel free at any time. And it's been a real pleasure and an honor to be on your show.
Thank you again. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.